Hello, Carson.
Hey, what's up, Kyle? How are you?
I'm fantastic. I live an awesome life. I get to interview my heroes like yourself.
Well, I don't know how I earned the right to be that, but
Well, let me go over some of it then, and that way you don't have to, brag about yourself. I'm sorry. I've called you the Elon Musk of the tattoo world because, in some ways, let me liken it like this. I'm not sure of your illegitimate kids, so I shouldn't talk on that. But you have taken and you made something that was unpopular, but that existed. You destigmatized the rotary tattoo machine, much as Elon Musk is making the electric car sexy and more wantable. You made the rotary more of a feasibility by making it a pneumatic tattoo machine first.
yeah, I think so. I was really young at the time, and I think the way that I was looking at it was that the coil machine. So I came from, I've been tattooing now for 35-ish years.
Good Lord.
So at the time, coils were the only real respected or respectable way of doing that. And rotaries were definitely not. A huge understatement would be that rotaries were not appreciated in the same way that they are today.
I would say a huge I can't argue. I can only think of, at the time that you came out with the pneumatic tattoo machine, I can only think of one that had any credibility to it, and I believe it was put out by Huck Spalding, and it was called like the Revolution or something.
Yeah.
Does that seem familiar?
Yep. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I don't know if I would say credibility is a good, but the company, I would say Spalding had credibility. So yeah, in that regard, for sure.
Okay. Yes.
But the truth is that I didn't think of, and it's funny because now, obviously, we know. I mean, maybe everyone knew at the time, but me. But I didn't look at the original pneumatic machine as a rotary personally.
Okay.
And I maybe rationalized a lot of like aspects of. I rationalized that using some of the aspects of the machine to kind of say, oh, it's not the same as a rotary. And I think part of that was just that I knew that nobody had any respect for the rotary, including myself. I personally viewed it as like the prison style tattoo. But at the same time, so the technology of the coil, now that was invented in the 1870s. And then I think it kind of came to the market and like, I don't even know if this is like the right way to word all of this, but it was patented in 1891. So that's where the opportunity kind of came clear to me, where I realized, okay, well, we're actually talking about, so this was in the 90s and the 1990s. So 100-year-old technology
still being used.
Yeah, like that didn't really make sense to me. Like technology advances in every field. Why would it not? And that's not to necessarily say that it hadn't been advanced, but it was still, the same tech.
Yeah. I mean, they were basically a doorbell. Just some of them were lighter, some of them were heavier. Some of them had T-shaped coils. I remember that was a big thing for me for a while.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, Icon came out with those weird armature bars. I bet you know all this stuff. That's why I'm excited to talk to you. Remember those weird armature bars?
Weird. What do you mean?
Well, they had a weird cutout on.
Yeah, there was definitely some. People were messing with them a lot. We had Next Generation come out with a 1.5 coil. There was people trying single coils and triple coils and all sorts of different things. So there was definitely people playing around with it and experimenting and finding different ways that worked. But interestingly enough, the standard was the regular 2 coil, and even to this day, people who still use the coils, that sounded weird. People who still use coils have settled more or less that the 2 coil is the best setup, right?
Yeah, generally. I mean, sometimes you see somebody using a single coil for a particular application.
Sure. Yeah.
But they don't seem to. I mean, they can't. It's not versatile. In that thought that you must have looked at pneumatic as a way to provide, and I'm going to use a word that I'm not sure is universal, but I call it give or forgiveness. When you use a coil tattoo machine, the momentum starts pulling down towards the magnet. I'm just explaining this for the viewers a bit, or the listeners, but starts pulling down to the magnet and it breaks contact. The electromagnetic coils now begin to lose their magnetism. And when at that same time, the needle starts to hit the skin, and messing around with that and finding a weird understanding with your machine, the skin, your hand speed, and all these things can make it easier for you to put out especially line work that seems more consistent. When you moved on to pneumatic, I'm guessing that you saw the ability to use the pressure inside of the merry-go-round like chamber, or the rotary part kind of, to provide some amount of give. Is that true?
Yeah, and that's kind of when I was saying rationalizing why I didn't believe it was the same as a rotary. Okay. That was kind of one of the things. So yeah, although it did use a traditional cam and follower mechanism, the whole mechanism was pressurized by air, sort of like, a car engine is pressurized with oil. So the parts weren't actually necessarily making the contact, although I would say in most cases it was, but in some cases there was some air there, and so there, you were basically pushing against air pressure rather than a like a rotary motor,
right?
And then the mechanism itself was the rotational mass. And that was a small amount of weight versus an electric motor. Like all of the components of the motor except the housing are spinning to create, right? So then you have a lot more inertia behind that rotational mass versus the pneumatic version.
I feel I've only used a pneuma once or twice. They were hard to convert over to, as I imagine you understood. It was probably one of your biggest problems with scaling. That was to get people on board with a quiet air compressor first, enough hose, and but at the time that you did, though, that I don't think anybody's made a machine as light as that now, is it? I mean, maybe some of the Phantoms or something like that I see, which I haven't tried, but even now that pneuma is still the lightest machine I've ever had in my hand. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think you're right. And, we really only produced one of that original version. I mean, there was a couple different variations that as we learned, we figured out better ways to do it. But for the most part, we made an aluminum, standard run, and it was 1.8 ounces. I had made a couple of, just for my own sake and just to test, that were made out of plastic that were like 0.8 ounces. I don't know what that is in grams, but 25 grams or something ridiculous. So there's nothing ever light? No, I mean, no, okay. I don't think so. You still had the situation where you're adding a grip to it, right? And back then,
grips are all steel.
Grips were all steel, and people were starting to do disposable grips, but people hated them. Just like all new tech, people resisted at first, and I was myself included. I didn't like the disposable grips. They probably were made from cheap materials too, so it was a little more flexible, and we liked the rigidity. And there are probably people still out there today who refuse to use anything but steel on a coil. And
I travel with them. Yeah. And in that too, in the it kind of, at the point that you made this, you made it sexy to people because some of the best tattoo artists in the world were using that. To my knowledge, it's like every one of the best tattoo artists. Maybe Guy Atkinson wasn't using one. I think he might have been using Next Gen. But even that Next Gen design of coil tattoo machines, they were designed to be lightweight. And it was during the time we were all hoping to get longevity. We've seen some of the old timers with their locked wrists or their arthritic fingers that were teaching us. And they swore by these coils that they loved, but some of those things were like 8 ounces. Sometimes.
Yeah, there were some that were close to a pound, actually. And that's not factoring in a 1-inch steel tube.
I can only imagine that. Then we started to find, though, I think a difference where we did actually crave some weight. We just noticed we wanted it down, lower.
Yeah.
So a steel tube with a Numa, honestly, probably the best feeling in my hand machine I've ever used. I don't use one now, of course. I don't think you guys are making them, obviously. You're not making the pneumatic style.
No.
But you yourself have now given into, I'm guessing you're pretty pleased with this. It's still called the Numa, and it's a pen now. Am I right?
Yeah, and we offer steel as well, and same thing. It's, you know, the bulk of our grips, the bulk of the metal is as far as close to the cartridge as it can get. So all the weight is right down at the bottom, and yeah, people love it. I think that having that little bit of weight in the right place provides some stability when you're trying to pull clean lines and keep your hands steady. That weight helps. And then also when your machine is a little on the too light side, you know, and I think most people don't really think too much about this, but let's say your machine is ultra light. And we also have extremely light machines too, 115 grams, and it's maybe one of the lightest pens, if not the lightest pen. But we also have full variation. So we've got one that's 13 ounces, which is about 400 grams, which is ridiculously heavy. But what we're finding is that some people want the weight because you end up not having to push into the, like, towards the skin, and instead just the weight of the machine. It's like it's like, okay, so if it's super light, then the action of the needle pushing into the skin pushes the machine away from the skin at the same time. So
you have to use your finger to grip it.
Right. So if there's some weight there, then it has a lot lesser effect in that regard.
Now, there's some other studies that this is why I'm sorry for any listeners that, and this is probably one of the more boring, but if you're a tattoo artist, this might be one of the more exciting. You studied the actual, I'm going to call it work time of the needle in the skin. Is that you follow through for this tattoo machine as the applications for line work, shading, gray shading, and color backing?
Yep. Yeah, we actually this was back in 2009 or something like that. We got a bunch of artists together. Everybody brought their favorite machines or what they thought was the best. We had about 45 machines. We tested all of them.
He's got to be some of the best tattoo artists that you know, too.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of very famous guys. And I had rented some high-end, like, macro lenses that went with these high-speed cameras. And we basically videoed each of these machines with a needle. And we, up close on the needle, and in super slow-mo, we were able to map out what we call stroke profiles. But yeah, it's basically like needle positioning in a given cycle. So if your needle starts in the up or retracted position, it extends and then retracts again. That's one cycle. And so how long it spends in each of those positions, you know, and honestly, we didn't set out we didn't know what we were going to find.
Okay.
We were going to do some research. We had some suspicions or some expectations, but what we ultimately discovered, you know, and the thing that stuck out the most to me was the difference between rotary and a coil was really dramatic, quite different. And so basically the coil spends a lot more of its life, a lot more of that cycle in the retracted position, like 2 or 3 times as much of that cycle it spends back, so not poking the skin.
Right.
So then
where the rotary is got to complete the cycle, so it's oftentimes almost 50-50. Am I wrong? Like
it's it's every single position. It spends the same amount of time in every single position.
Right.
You know, if you were to break it down, I mean, it's obviously like this wave. It doesn't have points, but in order for us to like examine it, we had to break it down into segments, right? So it would be like one stroke cycle might have been 100 segments. So, but each of those segments was the same amount of time, and the same amount of time was spent.
Okay. So some of those segments are actually in the skin, putting in ink, and other parts of those segments, though, are withdrawing or going down towards the skin.
Right, or in the other end of the cycle where it's just all the way back to.
Now, that would imply that rotaries would do terrible at tattoos or tear them up, but yet we have great artists using them. How did you figure that?
Well, so my opinion is just that, so okay, and this is going to be based on my experience, of course, and it's just an opinion, and I'm probably wrong. Who knows? But when I first tried using a rotary, so this was not my own rotary, but just something like the rotary. I do remember, and it felt like, so with a coil, there's what the artist feels is different from a rotary. A rotary, you feel a lot of feedback from the skin, comparatively, where a coil you don't really. It feels more like spongy or like free moving and fluid versus.
That's going to attribute to the spring, I'm guessing, that is allowing to get momentum and to contact to complete the circle. Am I right? You almost feel like because of the springs that are involved with the armature bar, there's a translation where you don't have the feedback in your hand. Well,
my opinion is that the feedback is actually the needle hasn't been retracted from the skin yet. So a coil, it has a very fast snap. So the needle gets in and out of the skin very quickly. And so as I'm moving my hand across the skin, I don't feel it because it's happening faster than I'm moving my hand. Whereas with a rotary, there's some snagging happening. And so that feedback is actually just because I'm moving my hand around, we're never tattooing hovering, we're always moving around. So the needle is just not being retracted fast enough. And so I'm feeling like a little bit of a catch on the skin.
And then people learned to work with that feel.
Right.
I'm guessing to have better results. And possibly also...
Just when you first switched from a coil to a rotary, you felt that snag and it sucked, and to do lines was a nightmare. But if you had enough patience and you could slow yourself down enough, you could make it work. But it wasn't ideal, right? And so that's why the coil world still exists, besides just the fact that it's a really neat device, and some people like that, and that might be enough for some people to stay with it. But for some other people, it's just that I don't want to have to adjust the way that I tattoo to use this other, like, why,
Right. Then, but I'm guessing you feel at least that you have answered that with your latest iteration of the Numa, with the Numa pen then.
Yeah, so the cool thing about my new machine, it's the Numa 4. We have 3 different versions of it now, but so the coil, so the limitations, there's obvious limitations of a coil, which are, you have to be able to maintain it, which is not easy. You got to be able to tune it. And, I would say a lot of modern tattooers, having never even used one before, would be sort of mystified by that part of it. It's kind of like...
I've watched it. Yes.
Yeah. So there's that. And then there's also, in the same way that the rotary has that limitation where it's linked to the cam directly, and so it has to fulfill the cycle. It can't skip part of the cycle, right? Or else it can with cushions and air quoting give, but it's different from a coil. So
yeah, wouldn't that generally, if I added a spring to that cam shaft of the rotary, which usually is 50-50 everywhere it goes, it spends the same amount of time in each segment. If I add a spring to that, when it enters the skin, it begins slowing down, and it might skip over and not go as deep, I guess, but it's actually longer in the skin then, isn't it?
Yeah, let me jump back for 1 second, and then I'll answer that. What I was trying to say about the coil is that in the same way that you can't alter a traditional rotary mechanism the way that they are designed today, you also cannot alter in the opposite way a coil. So in other words, you can't make a coil needle slow down in the extended position. It's always going to snap. So there are uses for that in a rotary where it is slowing down in the extended position. And since neither side can meet in the middle, that's why my machine is as unique as it is, because it can. So
follow. Yeah, because I didn't know that Numas were still out. I apologize for not keeping my ear to the railroad as much as I used to when I was a young kid, and really fascinated by this whole thing, by machines. But when I saw that there was a Numa, and then I saw your breakdowns of the skin cycle, the segments like we're talking now, I was immediately like, oh my God, I'm super stoked about this because I know he's researched it.
So let me try to describe what I've discovered. It's hard to do it, and we're using only words. But let me try to describe what I.
And can we also give some? I saw some diagrams on the website. I don't know if I was on your Instagram or your website. Can we also, do you have a place where people could listen to you and also follow along with those things?
Yeah. Yeah, our website is NeumaTattooMachines.com.
Spelled with an N, no P.
NEUMA, TattooMachines.com. And there's a support button. And under that support button, there's all sorts of information regarding the cams that we're talking about and other product information that would be useful as visual tools for this conversation, for sure. But there is, so this, and I need to make some type of infographic for what I'm about to describe. I haven't done it yet. But so what I have discovered is that there are two ends of the there are two perspectives of give in a rotary, right? So there is give as it is felt from the artist's perspective, and then there is give as it is felt from the skin being tattooed's perspective, right?
Okay. Yes.
And then it's a give and take. They are not equal. So what happens is, if you add give to a rotary machine, the artist will feel less snagging. At the same time, the skin will experience more snagging.
Okay.
That
makes sense.
Because, yeah, so it's really not that, it's more that you'll feel that sponginess, but like you were saying earlier, what ends up happening is because you need to get that same depth of penetration in order to make the dot for the tattoo to be effective, you end up lengthening the amount of delay that the needle spends just stuck in the skin before you pull it out. And so what that ends up doing is traumatizing the skin a bit more. And so that's why, like, if you're lining with a rotary that has give, let's say it has adjustable give, and you adjust it to the maximum amount of give, and then you try and pull a line with that, it's bad news, right?
Yes.
So if you're using a regular rotary, you would want it to have the least amount of give when lining. And that's why, because what you end up doing is you're tightening up that delay a little bit. Can
I talk about, because I bet you've experienced this too, and I find that I line different than other people. I generally line slow when I'm using a coil, at least. I line slower, and I build my line a bit more. I almost watch it go in the skin. And then many other people I knew that were doing line work, they had really snappy little, almost like rotary, you know what I mean? It wasn't like a rotary, but they would use a lot less needle depth, a lot less forgiveness, and they would turn it up and buzz like around 8 to 10 volts. And you're kind of describing that, I think, or at least that style of lining. Have you encountered people like myself, they almost rather a shader to line with?
Yeah, so that's me.
Okay.
I'm a line builder, but the thing is that from a tattoo machine manufacturer's standpoint, it doesn't matter what I want. Although the reality is that, like, I made the machine for me. I mean, to begin with, because I saw flaws in something, and so I was catering to my own desire. However,
did you find then that you needed to sell them so that you could just pay for all the research and development?
No, I don't care about. I don't really care about any of that. The way that I go into a project is like a gamble, and I'm willing to lose. You know. So
I do know, because this is something I want to get to the history of this. You almost you built a mystique around the Numa, and then by having the hybrid come out, which was an awesome machine. I think I've still got one somewhere. I traded somebody else a CNC machine that I had. But the hybrid almost said, hey, listen, you can just use a rotor. You follow me? Because it was also pneumatic and also the rotary. So you would see people using them on the road as a rotary, and then they were quiet, and you're like, that's the Numa? And they're like, yeah, I'm using the rotary attachment. And you're like, so a rotary is a rotary? And it broke the floodgates, in my opinion, just what I saw and I remember. It broke the floodgates of competitors who then had a viable product based off of everything that you did with the Numa, with the success.
Which is funny, because it's interesting to hear, and I'm not disagreeing, because I think that you're right, that what that machine did was it kind of highlighted and sort of enunciated something that we weren't aware of at the time. But I actually see that as being the worst machine I ever made. And what it ultimately did for me was make me realize I learned a lot from that machine, and it was
it full of compromises for you to try and hit a different spot with a attachment? Or
it was an experience. It wasn't compromise. It was just confusion. It was something that I saw the issue,
which was carrying a pneumatic
no
air compressor.
Yeah, I never really cared too much about that. It was more about the mechanism for me. There were other problems with that machine too. There's lots of problems with that machine, but ultimately what I'm getting at is that, so in the bigger picture, what I learned was about give. And I thought, because back then it was like, okay, rotaries are cool and everything, but coils have give. And we didn't quite understand at that time what is give. So personally, I believe that their industry right now is currently using the word give for 3 different
actual physics
circumstances that exist in tattoo machines. So there's coil give, which is, actual give. Basically, it means that the needle is not going to go all the way to the extended position if it encounters,
and it's going to retract quickly.
Right, and it still maintains the snappiness. So that's real give. So it shortens the length without lengthening the delay.
Duration. Okay.
Right. So, which is great. The second version is you take a rotary and you put a cushion in it, or a spring, right? Or like a flex bar or something like that, where now you are achieving that the needle doesn't have to extend as far as a direct drive before it gets retracted, but
you're increasing the time.
Right.
And increase the time in the skin.
Yeah, and then the third one is, in my opinion, and no offense to anyone in the world here, but I see it as a marketing tool more than anything. And I think that, so a lot of manufacturers say digital give or e-give or something like that. And effectively all that is so there are some electric motors that will detect that the motor is being slowed down by friction. And so it will add voltage to bring it back up to that speed. So that would be lacking e-give. And then a standard motor, when it encounters skin, it's going to slow the motor down. So they're calling that e-give. And I think that that's, first of all, a little bit deceptive because it's actually inverted, but also it's not give because it still has to go through the full cycle before it can retract.
Okay. Yeah. So there is, yes, I follow. So this still has the drag on the skin. I think that might be, I'm using, and I do love it. So I don't want to talk bad on it, but I think that I'm using a machine that has that. I only just now found out that I can change what I think you're calling e-give on a flux, which is a FK Irons machine. And I think that there's some kind of app in that you're supposed to be able to change it. I'm betting that's what you mean by e-give then. And
yeah, so e-give, I don't know specifically how Flux has it set up.
But generally, it's like my shaver, which encounters a rough spot and it turns the engine up a little bit higher.
Yeah, so that's actually the opposite of e-give. That would be e-give turned off.
Okay.
That's why I'm saying it's inverted, because they're actually adding a component to the system to make it turn itself up when it slows down. So that's, but then they're just
saying, can it make a quick enough adjustment for that? Like, I mean, I guess it can be quick and maybe even more perceptible than my own eye.
Yeah, definitely. These motors are very fancy, and they're also rotating at, let's say 6,000 to 9,000 RPM. Mm-hmm. So each of those so per minute. So that means 150 times a second up to, right? So every second it's sending 150 signals
of feedback.
Yeah. So it can respond really fast.
Right on. That's why all these guys are so much better than me now, then, huh? Damn Roms.
And the truth is that there's nothing wrong with any of those. There's nothing wrong, right or wrong. It's just that it's confusing and people are calling it all the same one thing. And I think that it serves the industry to know what's going on, and to know what they're trying to achieve.
Yes, I follow. I think many people now are starting out, especially as apprentice, just with a rotary. I recommend it to start out as an apprentice as a rotary because, and I generally like them to use one with a hard give or no give, I guess, so that they have all the feedback and then they can start applying give, but with the knowledge that they had. You follow me? I used to skate on a wood board and I could never hit my trucks on a grind. I was just terrible about it. I was not grind good. I switched to an aluminum board and suddenly everything was so stiff. I knew where my trucks were and I could hit them. It was amazing translation for me. Then I got tired of having bloody shims. So I went back to a wood board. And now with the translation that I knew was there from the stiff board, I then was able to still hit the lip tricks, but now with understanding of the wood's bending.
Yeah, I used to be a skater back in I guess that would have been late 80s, early 90s, and I've never even heard of an aluminum board.
Oh, really? I got tired of them. I'm not fat, but I've always kind of been bigger. And so I would break boards occasionally. I got really tired of it. Yeah. And I saw on eBay, I think I spent like $100 to $300 for just a deck. And it was solid aluminum.
Wow.
Yeah, dangerous. Terribly dangerous. Yeah. It's like when I think back on it, I'm like, that's a stupid idea. But I do remember learning a lot from that moment. We were talking about the hybrid, and you said it was possibly your worst machine you ever made. Is it like your learning experience then? This was obviously before your research in the coil, in your favorite tattoo artist's favorite machine. Yeah,
so this might confuse some people or it might mystify some people, but so at the same time, it was the worst product I ever made with the most amount of value for me personally, because failure is information. Mm-hmm. And so if I had not made that, I would not have learned so much, and so I would not have been able to apply that learning to this new machine, which I feel is my best machine I've ever made, right? So
I
with
love
failure,
because you've also made you revolutionized the industry, in my opinion. It's not even just my opinion. I talked with other artists that I was like, dude, I'm really excited. I got Carson Hill coming on this week. Halo, as a matter of fact, was one of them. And he's like, Oh my God, dude, the Numa was such an awesome machine. My whole shop was running them. We had a compressor set up and back. I had airlines going to every station. And yeah, you revolutionized that thought process, I think. And again, you open up the floodgates for the many machines. So now to hear that you're excited about your latest iteration, and it almost sounds like a swan song for you, right? Do you feel like you have more to do after this, or are you pretty satisfied here?
Oh man, if you only knew. Yeah.
You're never satisfied, are you?
Well, yeah. I mean, maybe to a fault, but my the pursuit of like improvement is too big within me that I would ever stop, even if it meant, some of it, no one will ever see, I'm sure, but there are things that I'm putting a lot of effort into even right this minute already. I mean, we just released a machine a couple of weeks ago, and I'm already testing the next one. So,
Awesome.
and my opinion is that this next one would be so much better than the current one that, you know what I mean? It's like, that's
Well,
just the
then
way
that I shouldn't even bother picking up the current one. Is that was one of the problems that kept me from getting the Numa for a while, because I knew it was an investment. I started saving up towards it. But honestly, by the time I got around to being prepared to actually get one, the hybrid had come on. And it was a short period after that, that paused me for a minute. And then a short period after that, like I said, the floodgates opened up. There was, I think the Gen 6 came out, and I seen DeVries was using that, which gave a lot of credibility to it. And it seemed like a lot of guys started then coming up with their own version of the rotary. Shortly after that, the Ego came out. There's all these different rotaries that people were trying. And because of the ability of some of these people, it seemed like it was a magic wand. Because you would look at your work and be like, well, the reason I suck can't be me. You can't, it's got to be this coil machine I'm using. And then there were so many options, you didn't know really where to start. But you wouldn't tell me then not to pick up the first version of this Numa machine, because you're still selling them, right?
Yeah, we still sell them, and there are people who don't even look at our new stuff yet. But my personal opinion is that it's a product line, really. And so if you were, let's say a year from now or something like that, I'm releasing the next one. But you had never used the first or the second one. I think that would be a pretty big jump. And so I think that I don't know how to properly word this.
Like they complement each other,
or like one leads to the next kind of thing.
It's kind of beautiful.
Like you almost wouldn't know what to do with the third one if you hadn't already tried the first one. It might be something like too much, So my whole philosophy is bring something to the industry that they didn't know they wanted. Right.
Okay.
So if that, let's say that's, for example, we just released the Macro, which is basically the Numa 4 with a whole shitload more power, right? So
okay.
Our Numa 4 is already more powerful than 99% of the other machines available. So to
is
jump,
that because you figure some of these people are using big cartridge mags, like 45s, even hundreds?
I mean, that's part of it, but the way that I look at it is, I have a little analogy that me and some of the people that I work with, we kind of jokingly talk about, where so you look at like some of these companies, and it's almost like, okay, you got an F1. If you went to go shopping for a truck and you went to the Ford dealership, you can get an F-150. You can get it with a 4-cylinder, a 6-cylinder, an 8-cylinder. You can get it an F-250, which is almost identical with a diesel, and get 1,000 pounds of torque, right? So it's kind of like what we do, right? We're not like redesigning a new machine and getting it a new look so that we can push something out the door, but it has the same 4-cylinder engine every single time.
Right.
We're settling on ergonomics that we think are useful, and then we're offering you different performance characteristics, which
Okay,
I think is
yes.
I think that's just a better way of approaching things. You know, like if so, what I'm ultimately saying is that some of these companies are cramming the smallest motor they can get away with into a machine so that they can optimize their, you know, battery life or something like that, right? So that it fits with the
Right.
overall platform of the machine or something
It's
like
a
that.
package for consumership rather than use almost.
Yeah. So my whole philosophy is all about performance. I don't care about any of, I mean, I do care about the other factors, but they're secondary.
Right. You're a tattoo artist. You're still tattooing to this
right.
day, right?
Yep.
So
yeah,
you're
so
using your product.
Yeah, I am. And I want something that does the tattoo quickly, efficiently, and effectively, where the customer comes back and it looks the way that I expected it to. And you know what I mean? I'm not spending a bunch of time like fussing with it. I just want to get it done. You know, that's so.
But you are spending a bunch of time fussing with it because you want to limit other people's fussing with it. Am I wrong? Like you're tinkering with this thing as you find a necessity to make changes to it.
Yeah, and the truth is that tattoos hurt, and I haven't been able to figure out a way to
make them not
get around that. Yeah. So
lidocaine, do you use that stuff?
I think it makes it worse. Personally, I'll use the spray, whatever, Bactine, but yeah, I think that, you know, the first 45, unless you're doing small tattoos, then yeah, use lidocaine.
No,
but
I feel it comes on kind of for my customers 3 to 4 hours in. If I've been using it, it's like then all the pain just starts rushing at them. Like
in my experience, it's like 1 hour, hour and a half.
Okay.
And then they're back to hating it. And maybe it's worse because they had this expectation that it was going to be easier.
Yeah, almost. Yeah. Like I've heard opioids lower your pain tolerance. Despite giving you an ability to deal with that pain, they limit your own ability to deal with that pain without their need. And then, and similarly, I feel like with lidocaine, like because you think it doesn't hurt, then you when it does start hurting, you're like, oh no, I'm not prepared for this. My endorphins aren't run. I'm just telling me to run away.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's say I'm trying to do a tattoo on somebody and they're the type of guy who just doesn't deal with pain very well. Okay. And now I'm having a hard time, or I have to do, you know, 2 times across the same area to get saturation. Now I'm doubling the guy's pain, you know, I'm lengthening the amount of time it takes to get it done. And I call that fussing or struggling or whatever. If it just goes in the first time I do it, well, then we're better off in all those ways.
Do you find that lidocaine also makes the skin tougher to penetrate?
Yeah, sometimes it can make it like sort of swell, like almost like it's swollen, and it's just like more rubbery.
Now you got to push harder, so you're doing more damage, especially if you're using a spring that's slowing down in it.
Right. So yeah.
So when you studied this, you found when you studied the stroke lengths and the different segments that you divided them up into, then you found different. I'm sorry, it's going to take me a minute to get to this, because now I'm understanding your product line is actually for an artist to pick and, you know, what type of tattooer they are, what they like, and maybe even what they would then like to take it towards. So you've studied coloring, packing, and the amount of time that should be in the skin as opposed to out. And the same with gray shade, in and out, and lines in and out. Do they differ dramatically? They must. I'm figuring gray shade needs to get out of the skin really quick, but I could be wrong because I generally slow my gray shade down. So maybe I'm actually dragging across the skin, but I may be causing more trauma because when it comes back to me healed, a lot of those midtones are kind of missing. I may have been mistaking the abraded skin and the redness there.
Yeah. So a couple questions that you're asking. Number one, let me clarify that. Yeah, we do some like actual like what you could call scientific research, but the like predominantly, I'm to level with you. My my studying or research that you keep referencing is mostly just me tattooing people and using different devices and different like parameters and stuff like that. So it's real world application every single time. It's never anything like extremely outside of the box, because I need to be able to perform the tattoo properly. You know, I can't like risk my clientele for it.
Right.
But yeah, and then the other thing is like what you're describing is a process that has taken me a long time to figure out, but it's not always what you expect. Like the outcome is not always what I expected it to be. So like you were saying, you think that, so actually the way that we have our cams marketed is we've got a liner cam, a shader cam, a blender cam, and a packer cam. However, the shader cam is, if I were to relabel them today, I don't know that I would call it a shader cam. And I have this discussion with people all the time. It's really a matter, it's really about hand speed more than anything. So like based on what I'm hearing you describe with your shading and how you slow down, and I do the same thing. Then I would say you probably want our packer or blender cam, because ultimately that is for slower hand movement versus, so we have it's 20, they're in percentages, our cams. So 20%, 28, 33, and 40%. So 20 is designed for people moving their hand very fast. Typically when people are lining, they move their hand faster. And so that's why we call it a liner. So now 40, at the other end of the spectrum, is meant for people who kind of do slow building up process. So like a gray, like shading, it would be perfect for that, or color packing, solid, saturated, that kind of thing, where you're not like really moving your hand fast. And then the other two are basically steps in between. So it's, you know, it's like the 28 is just a little bit slower than the 20, and the 33 is slower than that, and the 40 is slower than that.
Do I buy these separate, or do they come with the tattoo machine?
It comes with all of them.
So you can experiment and see what you like.
Yeah.
I like that a lot better for sure, because certainly when we're telling somebody that they, not really that they have to learn how to identify themselves in this spectrum, but I mean, now they can, right? They can, if what you're saying is it's not always the shader is the shader. You may have the color packer as the shader and be perfectly fine. So with that knowledge and then all the cams available, I can try each one out and see which one.
Yeah, and what I generally will recommend, we assemble every machine with the 20% installed, and we ship it that way. And what I generally would recommend is people start with that one. It's the one that is most like a coil, and it would feel the biggest change from what a normal rotary feels like. And then when they're ready to try the next cam, go to the other end of the spectrum and try the 40, and really get to feel that and see the difference and put it to the test. And then make a decision which one, like which area, because some people will go through all 4 cams. Some people will buy 4 machines and set it up with each cam, so they don't have to switch it around or anything. I mean, it takes 1 second literally, but I get it, you know.
Okay, right. Well, they don't want to cross-contaminate during the test.
Yeah, right, totally. But
it really is that easy though. 1 second, unscrew, drop in, and take out the old, put in the new, back together, go, and you're on.
Yep.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, so try the 2 ends of the spectrum, see the difference, and then you'll start to understand a little better, and maybe the 40 feels a little bit too slow, and you'll, okay, now I get it. Now I'll try the 33 or the 28 because that's better for me, right?
And at all this time too, you can still control a large amount of speed with the power supply itself.
Well, we're not actually talking about speed as in frequency. So when you're talking about the power supply, now you're talking about how many pokes per second.
Right.
So I'm not
talking
about
a ratio.
I'm talking about the velocity of the needle within 1 cycle. So 1 poke.
Okay.
And so does it go really fast, poke and get the hell out, like our 20, or does it slowly extend, slow down, poke, and then retract slowly like the 40? I know it
This is
sounds like really hard to wrap your head around that when it's 100 times a second, but it really is noticeable when you switch within the cams. You'll notice it. No, nobody doesn't notice it.
and not even it's not going to be compensated necessarily. So like some machines with a different spring, if I try out somebody else's machine, it's got a spring in it or something, or it's a new version, whatever, I try it out. I don't like it at one speed, and I can turn it up and find what works for me. But in this case, if I left it at the same voltage, or even turned it, I would still notice you feel that I would still notice the difference of the ratio or the velocity.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, my machine is the only one that's the only one that's similar would be a Dan Kubin.
Okay. Which, so, man, I was going to ask you who else in the industry are on your radar. Obviously, Dan Kubin is.
Yeah, you know, I've actually never used one, to be honest, but I've had millions of talks with people, and it sounds to me like his machines are the closest to this kind of a philosophy as anything else. The rest of them are all like, so our 40% cam is standard. It's called sinusoidal. It basically means that the needle is spending the same amount of time in every position as every other position. So that's every rotary on the market is using a sinusoidal waveform. Yeah, everyone. There aren't any that do stroke profiles. So if you're switching between something that isn't the Numero 4, right, other rotaries, and you're noticing a difference, there are other factors. You know, there is whether or not it has give. There is the voltage and winding of the motor, the output, like wattage of the motor, the torque of a motor, the speed, stall, all these ratings of a motor that determine, you know, what that feels like. So in other words, like our machine has a 9-volt motor. It's just a motor with a 9-volt winding. Okay. A lot of guys are using a 12-volt winding, and so if you put, like, let's say you're using, I don't want to use anybody's brand name right now because I try to stay away from that, but any other brand, let's say, and you normally use it at 11, and then you put mine on at 11, it's going to be a rocket ship because it's wound at 9. So
does that mean it would also possibly blow at anything over 9 or get too hot over 9?
No, they can take it. I mean, if you turned it up double, then yeah, that's going to be an issue. But
okay, but nobody's going to 18 volts.
You're more likely to like saw somebody's arm off than to blow up these motors. These motors are really efficient, and if anything, what we're finding out is that, let's say it's a 9-volt winding, but you run it at 5 volts, you're more likely to heat it up and cause problems by underpowering it than by overpowering it. There's basically a certain amount of electrical current coming through the motor, and if you're not allowing that current to be used, then it builds up in the form of heat, basically.
Okay, I follow. When we talk about your own tattooing, I understand most of your tattooing to be biomechanical. Are you doing other forms of tattooing then as well?
No, not really. I mean, okay. Every once in a while, like a family member or something wants something that isn't that, and yeah, I'll do it. But no.
Right, no excitement. But biomechanical, I'm guessing, also has gray shade, it has line work, and it has color packing, all involved in it.
I mean, I don't know that biomech necessarily covers all of the. I mean, for the most part, I use the 20% cam for everything. I'll use the other ones for experimental purposes and certain, like gray. I don't use it for grays and stuff like that. But the reason that you could choose to trust me is because I know that I'm only one person, and I know that my attempt is to cater to an entire industry. And so, you know, I'm a listener, and I like feedback. I want to hear it from people, and I have been doing that for my entire career, and I'm especially fixated on it these days.
Do you remember Icon or Machine Gun Magazine? It was called.
Yeah,
it was put out by Icon, and they studied or attempted to study tattooing, and then to come up with a formula. Do this, it works. And I tried it, I tried to do all their stuff. I don't know that they were wrong, but I learned from that actually in 2 years of trying to follow it, that everybody's different and they tattoo different. I thought for sure I knew all, like, this is how you do it. After I read their magazines, understood it. And then I got tattooed by Tom Renshaw. It's one of the biggest experiences of my life because I'd never really even met anybody in the industry with that kind of, name. And Tom, when I looked at his machine and started picking his brain on it, I realized, not that he was ignorant, but he didn't have any desire to. Does that make sense? Like, he was like, this works. I use it. Mickey Sharps. I pull my contact back until I have to shake it to start it. Now it hits soft and I go. And when I saw him do that, I was like, man, screw this magazine. So everybody tattoos different. Even Jeff Gogwe, awesome artist. I'm sure you know. But he, when I asked him about tattoo machines one time, he pointed me to a book, I think by Joey Desmeux. I don't know how to print. And it was just a little brief book that I'm reading through it. And I'm not saying that I know, but I know that it was wrong, or at least wrong for me. Some of his theories on the machine, I began to realize almost everybody making tattoos and with an idea of their tattoo machine knowledge, most of them are all just feeling and not really concrete,
Yeah. Yeah. You bring up a good point. Ultimately, it is that there is no right or wrong way to do it. I would say back to the recommendation for an apprentice would be something like, seek and absorb as much information as is possible, and then apply it in a way that it works for you. Like find your own way, because that's what everybody is ultimately doing.
That's what it is. Even, yes. And even as yourself, somewhat, as you're saying, these tattoo machines you're working with now are all your own experience more. Like I figured that you had hundreds of tattoo artists all in a row working on the same design on the same type of skin body type. But I guess it couldn't possibly be that. It's probably one of the harder parts of the greed or the corporate world breaking into our industry, is that it really is too individual to break down in an easy, simple formula, do this, do that. And now they get left with their desire to make money as to find marketing ploys like e-give. And I shouldn't say ploy, because that implies that it's almost a trick, but I do mean, just a marketing tool as what it is, not necessarily what's best for you or this or that. But if I tell you want to have e-give and my other competitor has e-give, now you're definitely going to get one with e-give. You don't even know what the hell it is.
Yeah. And again, for like, some people would probably swear by that. What you're calling a marketing tool, someone else is going to say, I wouldn't dream of using a machine that didn't have that. And so,
yeah,
so
it's all personal.
I agree with what you're saying. So for me, the true north is create a machine that outperforms what is available. That's what I'm aiming for. And of course, you're right that there isn't like a specific answer, because we're talking about people, and people have preference, and people are not going to be the same. And that's what makes people beautiful. Like, we're all different. We all we see it differently. We have different perspectives, and that's great. So there isn't like an easy way to find the best. So that's when certain things that's when you're like, it does come into a form of compromise. Like, look at my machine right now, right? Like, we basically have one machine with 3 different motor configurations, and then it's got, 8 different grip configurations, and then it's got 3 different material configurations, and then you have 4 different cam configurations, and even 2 different follower configurations. And so when you multiply those all
What
up,
is a follower?
The follower is like the brass bearing arm or aluminum bearing arm, and so that's the thing that's pushing the cam basically, and they're weighted differently, and so a heavy one will have a different effect from a light one. A light one will give you a quicker response but less inertia. A heavier one, slower response, but it stores energy, and so it gives you more smooth hit, right? So, but now if you were to take all these different configurations and multiply it out, like we've done this before, and we have hundreds technically of different configurations. And so all of that is because I see that we are individuals and that we all have different preferences and different opinions, and that they're all equally valuable. When it comes down to it, we're here to make tattoos the best we can, and there isn't one way to do that. And so let's see what I can do to make that easier for people. However, there is a line, right, where my, like, some of the other characters in this business have to step in and stop me, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to have 10,000 different configurations or 50,000, like a new configuration for every artist. You know, like that doesn't make any sense.
It's almost going to scare people away, marketing wise, because the confusion.
And it doesn't make sense from a business perspective either. You know, at the end of the day, if we're going to stay in business, we've got to be able to sell machines, and you know, so that's, you know, there is that factor as well.
What's next on the horizon for you? Do you have anything that you can talk? I'm sure that some of the stuff you want to keep shrouded, because one of those industries.
We do have, like I said, we're constantly testing different performance characteristics. So there's always something that I'm extremely excited about, but not able to talk about. So there's that.
Yeah.
We also have a few new grips coming. So it's just going to be like, we have a shift grip right now, which is basically double, like a dual position grip. We're making a new one of those that's bigger. We're making a.
Does that have something coming off the edge of it or something like that? You say dual position, you can hold it two different ways, or what is that?
Yeah, so you can hold it like the normal way down by the cartridge, or you can choke up on it a little bit and have the cartridge kind of extended out from your hand, and it basically makes your circle size bigger. It's really good for like shading, blending, texturing, stuff like that. Yeah, and then we also have a couple of different like super oversized grips. We have our disposable grip. We finally have that design complete.
That's awesome. Are they in production and available to the public?
Not available yet. In production, yes, but we're still a few months out from that.
That's exciting day though, because
very exciting. Yeah.
As a traveling tattoo artist, I really don't want to take anything back to the autoclave, and you know, if I can just leave it there, so much easier for setup and for travel.
Yeah.
What if a friend of mine a long time ago who is a manufacturer of machines, he's no longer doing it, but he was talking about his interest in toroidal coils in the application of tattoos. Saw that somebody had a patent on it. They never really used, or it never got put out. But he believed it would be possible to suspend a rod in between a toroidal or a donut-shaped coil, and then using computers try to mimic the best stroke length and coil style give. Is my understanding?
That actually is how I began the process of.
You had toroidal coils in mind, even?
It's not a toroidal coil. It's a. I mean, it's possible that it forms a toroidal vortex of magnetic field around it. I'm not sure, but it's called a voice coil. Yes. So it's similar to a solenoid in that the core is what moves, right? And there's coils wrapped around it. But in a voice coil, each coil is individually, maybe not each and every coil, but there are like bands of coils, and those bands are individually wired into like a computer and then individually controlled. So you can fine tune the stroke profile. So that was how I was going to achieve this originally. The issue that I came up against was the tech exists. It's not an invention. It's just a reapplication. And so the problem is that what it's being used for is robotics. And so these motors tend to be very large. So there's that. There's also the issue of getting, so because tattooers want 150 hertz average of speed. So when you have 150, what happens is as the speed increases, the stroke length shortens. So to get 150 hertz, you're only getting like max 1 millimeter of stroke length. So if you want 4 millimeters of stroke length, for example, you're getting something like 30 hertz at best with a very large motor. So I think just maybe one day the tech will, I mean, unless somebody's out there is going to solve the problem, because they are, you know, I'm not a motor.
It's almost a manufacturing problem, right? Because the motors that exist that you could get are not necessarily used for, they're not going to be small enough.
I think the issue is that the tattooing industry isn't addressing it. And so the tattooing industry has a specific need, and that need only exists in the tattoo industry at the moment. So if that's going to exist in the form of a tattoo machine, that means that somebody within the industry needs to approach it from a specific need of tattooing and not borrow it. Because right now what we're doing is we're taking motors that exist from, you know, for example, Faulhaber is a motor manufacturer that we use. The
for race cars or something?
It's for automation mostly. So factories.
Okay.
So like an assembly line type thing where there's robots putting, you know, the same part over and over and over again.
But because they exist, you can use that technology. What you're saying is somebody basically would have to come in and make the new supply chain. Is that right?
Or even, yeah, I guess technically they would have to produce the thing eventually, but even to design it, I think that is the first hurdle, is design, because, you know, think about this company Faulhaber, which does $260 million in sales annually. So they've got a budget of R&D that is enormous, but their focus isn't tattoo industry, right? And maybe one day, so maybe one day Faulhaber, because I know that tattooing is growing, and like Faulhaber knows about us. They know that we're using their motors, and maybe the segment becomes big enough that they decide, you know, okay, well, let's put some budget
R&D.
For specifically for tattooing. That could happen, or, you know, someone else comes along, or something like that comes in, and then after you've gotten the design phase done, now you're going to need to. So that's why someone like Faulhaber would be better set up for that, because they're already making motors, and now they're just going to change some of their line, you know.
Yeah, man, I've had a blast talking with you, and I think I'm kind of done with my geek and nerd part. Something I would like to talk with you about, and I probably should have started with some of the history of tattoo machines, as you understand it. The first coil, and the first, which you already went over somewhat, and also the first rotor. My understanding was the first tattoo machine that we used by hand was like a box perforation machine, and it was actually a coil rotary combination.
Well, I mean, all rotaries are coils, you know. Like this coil is basically just a winding of, like, literally a coil of copper wire. That's what a coil.
Now, the first one I saw was a magnetic piece fixed on a big wheel, and there was a coil down at the bottom that would become magnetized and draw that metal down to it, and then it would demagnetize, and it would go back up and magnetize again.
That's a motor. That's an electric motor that you're describing. So within an electric motor, there is a magnet fixed to the housing. Like, and this is in very basic terminology here.
No, I think I see it now just when you say that basically it was just missing a few of the coil packs. to really make it my understanding of what a rotary motor is nowadays.
Well, and it was also in 1870 something, and so it was probably a very crude version of what, nowadays modern rotary motors are very, very different looking than they were back then. But in the basic technology is the same.
So you would say the first tattoo machine was generally a rotary tattoo machine?
Yeah, and it was, like you said, it was actually an engrave. They called it engraver, but yeah, it would perforate.
And it's funny to me to hear the term "loyal to the coil" oftentimes, or because it implies that you don't want to learn more about your industry on one aspect.
I can appreciate it. I don't look at it that I am not obviously loyal to the coil, although my whole approach with rotaries is to make them yeah. but I can appreciate why. And I look at it kind of like an old car enthusiast, right? There are people who they're really into like a 1940 T bucket or something. You have to forgive me because I'm a modern car guy. I don't really know cars from the past, but I get it. Like they want to be able to have their hands on it, and what they don't like is like there's a computer doing all the shit for them. Like so, and I get both sides because I'm actually the one who would prefer the computer to do it all for me and just get the maximum amount of power just by pushing down the pedal. That's me, but I don't think that that's the right way necessarily. It's just a different way of looking at it, Like, check this out, dude. Right now, we're so hands off, like let's say I've got a car, it's got 500 horsepower, and it's got all these like really fancy cars are really neat because if you're into technology, then you're into cars. It's just the way that it is, right?
Okay,
But I don't know exactly why this car puts out 500 horsepower. Like, how did they achieve that? It's got 6 cylinders. Maybe it has 8. It's got turbos. Sure, I get that. I understand what those things do. But how come there's other motors that are bigger, but have a supercharger too, and they don't? I don't understand it entirely. But if we were car guys from back in the day, well, then we would know because we did it ourselves and we added the boost pressure and we know where that's going and why does that matter and how. So it's kind of like, I'm appreciating the things that are there, but I'm numb.
Do we have a fear of that in the industry as we go forward with rotary tattoo machines? We trust manufacturers like that. Many of us are like I ask people when they have their new rotary and they try and tell me how awesome it is, because everybody, once you get a new rotary, it is the new or a new machine. It's the coolest thing for 2 weeks. There's nothing cool. But during that time, everybody wants to sell you on their new cool thing. And I will ask them questions and very quickly, I'm like, you don't have a basic concept of what the hell is going on inside that tattoo machine. Like, is it a rod driven machine or, where is the motor suspended? What size motor does it have? Man, it works really good. As we get closer to there, do you think, do we become more dependent on people like yourself, and do we lose anything as an industry?
That's up to you. Right? Like, why?
Well, good, and that's up to our listeners too, then, because that's why you are on the show, Carson.
Yeah. Why am I not afraid of that?
Yes. Why not?
Because I'm taking it into my own hands. If I see if that threatens me in some way, I'm going to do something about it, and that's what my whole business approach has been about. Like, yeah, I can see where it's headed. I don't like it, so why don't I change it myself? And I think that if that scares you, then that's the answer. Don't be along for the ride. Be the pilot. Yeah,
I implore anybody, certainly, whatever you're using, to understand it. Do you think, though, that we get to a place? I mean, you've got a lot of information available so that you can pick these things out. I was excited just to read over and look at your graphs, try and get an understanding of them. They did give me a good, they open up like a window of thought somewhat, right? So now I'm thinking about all tattoo machines on a different level. However, eventually we get to the marketing aspect of it. Not everybody has the same goal. as you to just produce a better quality product than what is available. Some people just want to market those things, and the client or the tattoo artists as ourselves are not aware we would be in one of those places where.
So I'm going to say something very counterintuitive, right? My answer to that is that what you're illustrating is scarcity. You're talking about there's only one pie, and we're dividing this pie into pieces, and if too many people take too many pieces of the pie, blah blah blah.
Okay.
My philosophy is there is no pie, there is no limit. We are not dividing up anything here. Everything is endlessly abundant. And so, although that seems wrong, I think not only is it right, I think it's useful to look at it that way.
I love that. That makes me want to ask you other questions about aspects of your life that might have played into this, about spirituality and your outlook on life itself. Do you have anything that you would add?
I don't believe we're alone. I don't believe this is accidental, and that's probably as far as I would go with that. I don't claim to know the answer to that question, but to me, it just feels like there's more. There's more than meets the eye, sort of thing.
I feel like that when I talk. That's why I even ask. It's perfect answer, and I think it wraps it up great. That I believe I've stayed too long and said too much. Carson, let me thank you because you've indirectly, perhaps, and even directly, been an influence in my tattoo career and my understanding of tattoos, my desire to understand tattoo machines and all. So let me thank you for that. And anybody else out there that is listening, please look into his long career, understand where he's coming from. I really appreciate you talking.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. And for anybody out there that is hearing this and has more questions, I like to make myself available for my customers or anyone really. So yeah, so anytime, reach out.
And how do we get a hold of you then to reach out to you for just those questions?
We actually have on our new website, it's newmatattoo-machines.com. There's in the support area, there is a button called Ask Carson, and it's basically if our FAQs don't answer your questions, you can directly contact me there. So you can do that, or I'm obviously on Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff too. You can reach out to me directly.
That's awesome too. Ask Carson button.
Yes, sir. Yep.
I'm wrapping it up. I'm just really impressed by that. No one else has that. I don't know. Carson, my wife just gave me the, come on, Kyle. She gave me that sign. So thanks so much for talking with me. Have a great life, brother. I look forward to seeing you out there and continued success.
Cool. Yeah, let's keep in touch. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you, man.
Bye, see you.